Hello and welcome, fellow awesomologists to Awesomology. I'm Sue.
And I'm Ben, and in this episode, we are taking off our fortune teller turbans and putting on the fedora a la Indiana Jones and looking back into history. Kinda, sorta, anyways.
Kind of, sort of. Well, specifically, we are looking all the way back to February of 2021. That is just 8 short months ago. Do you remember February of 2021?
Barely.
Yeah, neither do I. And we're going to revisit a fun blog post we shared. One of the great things about not remembering February 2021 is that it was an exciting surprise to remember we shared this blog post. In this blog post, our team helped predict what was in store for us in 2021.
So if you're not familiar, stop listening right now and go to exclamation QSO, that's exclamation CUSO.com, and check out the Our Predictions for 2021 post on our blog, or you can just listen on and check out the post later. We'll share the link. And what we did, and by we, I mean Sue, was ask our team 4 simple questions about what they thought 2021 had in store for us, because if there's anything that we learned in 2020, Sue, it's that life and our world is 100% predictable, right?
So I'm going to say maybe there's some predictability here, but instead of dwelling on that, let's just dive in and see how we did. The first question we asked was, what do you think should be top of mind for people with your specialty or in the industries we served? And when I look back at this, here's the most self-serving answer I can possibly get for the 2 things that I think are interesting here. It is my response and your response. But the reason I think this is interesting is seeing really how this played out. So my thought at that time was that something that should be top of mind is investing time, sweat equity, and mindfulness in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we've certainly talked plenty this year about DEI, both on the podcast with some of our guests and also internally and out in the real world. And I think I'm really patting myself on the back here, but I think that prediction bore out. You saw, it was really at the sort of the end of 2020, coming into the beginning of 2021. That was the season of the people who needed to budget, like ourselves, to put money behind an effort, were really able to pivot and start making those plans. And you see so much of that bearing out in the real world. And there are even more opportunities for free and low cost webinars and education and online events centered around diversity, equity, and inclusion. You see a lot more discussion of how what makes the business case, even though we don't want to feel cynical about diversity, equity, and inclusion. A lot of the people we're talking to, like, they have to keep the lights on, they have to keep their water and sewer going, and so the business case doesn't stop being important. So I do think, and I honestly, if we started, I don't know that we decided we were going to try and tease 2022. I think this is only going to get bigger, because as people started to dive in, we really got this shared awareness that it's a big effort. You don't get to just choose one area and just be great for women or people of color or the LGBTQ community. It's a lot, and it's about bringing people to the table and being mindful about it. So there's me. That's my pat on the back. The thing that you said, Ben, and I think this is also interesting, is that, here's your quote: "We've all been chewed up and spit out by the pandemic. How we make it through will show our true colors. Are we going to revert to old tactics? Are we going to continue to push to be newer, better, newer, and progressive?" And so my question for you is, do you have the same sense that I do, that we have maybe two different groups of thought in, certainly in the business world, maybe in the world as a whole. You have one group that is trying to figure out, what's the next thing? Where do we need to innovate from here, because we're not going back? And then we still have this other group of people that are talking about back to normal, when things are the way they used to be, and really trying to push that narrative that this quote unquote post-COVID world is going to be business as usual in some way. Do you see that too?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, to be fair, we should recognize that there's people everywhere in between those two extremes too, right? But you can't help but feel the two extremes, like the people that have just totally gone all in on everything that we learned in 2020, and whether we're talking about working from home or anything else. And then, yeah, definitely the people that are still holding on to that sliver of hope for back to normal, whatever that is. And, the other thing to recognize, and I really am trying to be fair and not dodge your question at the same time, is I think everybody is hungry for, if I can put it in virtual air quotes, back to normal, right? Like, but I think what we're looking for or hungry for there is like a feeling of normal. It's this feeling of like, and I don't know if it's, eliminating that feeling of constant worry about what unforeseen thing might be happening next, or the next turn in this whole thing, or, because it has definitely been this roller coaster, right? And this feeling of like, as soon as you take a step forward, it's two steps back, and you're having this new challenge or this new thing to deal with. And and the other, I'm just going to keep stacking onto this answer, Sue. The other thing is, let's try and remember back to, February 2022 and earlier. Like, there were a lot of other things that we had to deal with that had a similar feeling, right? Where, you maybe didn't know what was coming around the corner. You tried to make progress on a thing, but other circumstances held you back a little bit. It just maybe wasn't as scary, or maybe wasn't it wasn't a thing that impacted every single person on your team and every customer or member you have. So, the scale of this thing obviously makes it super unique and special. But
Right.
but yeah, I definitely, the short answer is I definitely feel those two sides of the people that are just hungry for back to normal, and the other folks that are just ready to move on with what we've learned and what we know, and maybe the future that like we could craft or pick ourselves.
And maybe it's exactly to your point, maybe it's trying to bring those two lines of thinking together by saying, like, listen, the back to normal people, what you want to feel like is that something in your life is somewhat predictable.
Yeah.
You don't want to be constantly laboring under this sort of cloud of stress and what's going to change and what's going to be unforeseen. And that's okay. That's, to use the word again, normal. But like, know that that's what you want. We don't need to go back to everything the way that it was for you to get to the place you are going to feel more comfortable. We just have to, we have to figure out what normal is going to start to feel like again. And, to a certain extent, we have to, I think, more honoring that more progressive mindset, we have to decide, like, can we just function never being completely settled again? Is that maybe a healthier mindset, to be able to look at everything and be like, well, what if we burn the whole thing down? What, what if all of our assumptions, like in the nicest way possible, what if all of our assumptions, what if we just threw them away? What would that look like? And, I think that would be a really cool and innovative mindset to start changing things, like get beyond that. Let me keep stacking things now, as long as we're stacking things. We, for so many years, and maybe particularly in the work I've done in the credit union movement, but this is probably ubiquitous, where, you talk a lot about that person who's like, well, we tried that and and it didn't work, so we're never going to do it again. Like, we are decades beyond that person. We can't even, like, that is not even the mindset we can have now. Now, maybe the mindset is, what if none of this was anything? What if we never did, what if we pretend we didn't know any of this and started from the beginning and built a completely different foundation, and I
Yeah.
think a lot of that would be really unsettling, especially for people who now are hungry for, like, I want to be able to turn on my TV and watch The Price is Right and not have everything seem like a trash can fire. But but probably very good, and good for a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. I want to add on to what you just said, but I think there's going to be a space for me to revisit that hunger for returning to normal and the whole notion of, we tried that thing before and it didn't work. So I'm going to try and remember to save that for a
Okay.
future question. I
Put a
do
pin in
want
that.
to, yeah, I do just want to revisit one thing that you said at the beginning when you were talking about the DEI response too. And just for what it's worth, I am so curious about what the next phase of all of that looks like. And let's be real, there's probably people and companies and stuff already working in this next phase where
Mhm.
DEI really is like woven into what they're doing. And I wonder if it's even called DEI anymore. It's
Mhm.
just like the way that they operate now, the way that they do things, the way they hire and seek customers and seek members. And so yeah, I don't really know quite how to say it, because I don't know what it looks like yet, but we
Mhm.
right now can pause and look at the last year and a half and say, yeah, there's this DEI movement that's really taken shape and created a lot of great momentum. What'll it look like in a year and a half from now? And I don't know. I'm curious to
Right.
see. Yeah.
Right. Well, and you have to think too that that is a thing that is constantly going to evolve, because it's such a broad umbrella, and because it covers things like country of origin, and it covers economic conditions and all of these things. Like, there are always going to be differences, and we're sort of programmed, just the human brain, like we seek out familiarity, we eschew differences, and there will always be something that we can say, well, this person is different than me in this way. And so it will never be a perfect utopia of not having to be mindful of differences. I think it will just evolve, and and in 10 years it'll be like, oh, how we did all that work 10 years ago and you felt like you had it all cracked. Well, here's a class that emerged, or here's a segment of the population that's
For
emerged
sure.
since then.
Yeah.
And we just straight up left them behind because we didn't think about that as a difference.
Right.
you
Yeah.
know and that's I think that's being pretty optimistic. That's saying in 10 years we've solved everything that's happening right now, so
Yeah.
so much so that we can create new ones, but it might be further down the road.
Yeah. If we're talking about, since the theme of the day is future predictions, I think we can safely predict that it'll be longer than 10 years before we can have any kind of conversation like that. But the awareness of it, who knows
Yeah,
what might change. All right, we should move on. Move
moving
on to
on.
number 2. The second question we asked was, what is one thing will not change in 2021? And yeah, some interesting feedback on this one too. I am going to also mention your response, Sue, but there was some good feedback from others too. And in particularly, one person talked about how specifically the credit union movement, but I'm sure every industry is going to be looking for soft skill training, culture training. Maybe we can attach DEI to some of that too, but just stressing the importance of living, being respectful, not making assumptions. And of course, in a time when we're all maybe working a little differently, than we're used to, even if it's been a year of, working from home or this new world that we're in, even if we're still kind of figuring it out, to remind yourselves of some of those really fundamental skills of how to interact with people is super important. And I think this is a prediction that was right on,
Mhm.
and I'll also just say too, especially if anyone's listening and realizing like, oh man, we haven't done any work like that this year. I think for what it's worth, that's okay. We've all been on the hamster wheel, right? Where we've been kind of spinning and spinning and maybe just trying to figure out where to put our priorities and what to focus on next and strategy and all of that. So it's okay if some of this stuff was maybe kind of out of sight, out of mind for you. But maybe something to consider about or to consider and maybe decide whether or not you want to work on it as a person or as an individual and make it a part of your plan. But
Yeah. Well, and
definitely, yeah,
sorry, I'm doing that thing again where I'm so excited about what I'm about to say. You finish, and then I have something to say.
I'm so used to it by now, though, Sue.
Oh my gosh. So
Were
I
you gonna
think,
go ahead?
yes, I think, what I really, speaking to your comment about some places that maybe are saying they haven't worked on this, like we really are, not to be over dramatic. And I don't think it's over dramatic. We're talking about a period of time with shared trauma, right? And even if you're saying like we haven't done a soft skills class or we haven't talked about this in our monthly meetings, what you have done is the thing that I think we all do, hopefully, as we are individually healing from trauma throughout our lives, which is to try and self-regulate and go, oh, I'm reacting to that thing out of my trauma and not out of what's reality. And we're doing that for each other. So even if you're not having a soft skills class, you are saying like, maybe to your coworker, maybe to your team, like, okay, well, let's talk about what that person might be going through. And okay, and we all know one big thing that person's going through.
Right.
But also, what are the other things? What are the other extenuating circumstances? Or, having more, certainly I've heard this a lot, like from the credit union call center team sort of chatter and the service chatter where, we have managers now that are saying like, remember, people are like, they've lost their patience. We've all been going through a thing. So let that inform, how you're reacting to these people. And
Right.
if we're just in maintenance mode with that and just trying to be able to consciously work through trauma, like that is working on soft skills. Keep doing it. You're awesome.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Excellent advice. The other response from you, Sue, was talking about how the competition for our audience's attention is going to continue to grow. Obviously, messages coming at people from every direction and in every kind of way, but also maybe even a visible uptick in things like digital marketing and stuff like that. Some of the changes that we saw, like in the credit union movement, like adoption of online services and mobile banking and things like that. We see some of that in marketing and advertising too, where there was kind of this transition from maybe some traditional ways to more of an emphasis on digital. Not that there's still not, in our world today, a place for some of those traditional marketing efforts and stuff like that, but we definitely have seen a higher priority on some of those digital channels. And the other thing that you mentioned was the challenge of that we'll have specifically in 2021, and it'll continue to grow in the future, of always trying to figure out how we can reach the right people, right time, say the right things. And I think that reminds me of what we were talking about in the first question about that whole concept of, we tried that once, or we've tried that before, it didn't work, or maybe it did work, but we don't need to do it again. Whatever the reason is that your reflection tells you to do or not do a thing. I do think that there's a reset button that needs to be hit on all of that. Not to say that we need to forget what we've learned, but as much as we want to sit here and talk about how we predicted the future for 2021, there's a lot that we didn't predict, and there's a
Mhm.
lot that we'll just never know. And I think the same is definitely going to apply to the future. And who knows what traditional things we used to do might be something that people are really hungry for in the future, and thinking of that group of people that are so ready for back to normal, and doing the air quotes thing again, um, there might be a really, really captivating and interesting time in the future to do some of the stuff that we did a couple of years ago, or maybe even longer ago, that we just haven't done recently because of the state of the world, or because that maybe that stuff just kind of sat in the archives for us. So I don't even know specifically what I could give as an example, but thinking of like in-person events, I mean, this virtual world that we've been living in, there's so many conveniences that have come with it. I mean, think about the amount of content that we've probably assumed in the last year and a half, because
Mm.
we can attend all that virtual stuff cheap, free, or easy, and in our sweatpants, right? How will that swing back to, like, how hungry will people be to get on a plane, go to a conference somewhere, see people, hug people? I know right now that might still feel a little like, "Ugh, I don't know, not ready." But I mean, will the in-person event just have this new value that it didn't
Mhm.
have a year and a half ago? So to say maybe we tried doing an in-person event for the way that we want to present that content, and we didn't get a great response. Nobody came, or the audience was too small and it wasn't worth the investment. Well, I don't know, maybe you want to try that again now, because people are going to be really ready for that stuff. Maybe they even already are now. So interesting to think about what stuff we might need to bring back or try.
Yeah. Well, and I think uh, there's something about that sort of like a boutique feel that you could bring to something, right? So we talk a lot about the experience, the user's experience with something, or when they interact with it. And I think as some of this stuff, and stuff from 2 years, stuff from 10 years, stuff from 30 years ago, however you want to repackage a thing that maybe you tried and didn't work, I think people are hungry for experiences. And this is a super prime time to think about packaging something in, and I'm trying to decide if I should break down what I mean by boutique for the benefit of people, listening. And what I mean is making it special, making it, you think about uh boutique, like actually physically walking into a boutique, it's curated, it has a feeling. If that boutique is meant, if you're that boutique's customer, you walk in and you feel at home, and it feels right to you, and there's just a sense of perfection to it. And if you can connect even an old idea, a retired idea, and make it a boutique feeling for someone, uh and like that starts to that even maybe starts to transcend that right time, right place, right person thing, because now you have snagged them. Now if it's even if it's the wrong person, like you've made an impression, you've made that boutique impression. And if they're not going to be your customer, they're going to recommend you.
Right.
So yeah, that maybe that'll be my buzzword. Maybe I'm going to go like all in on the boutique feel
Yeah.
for 2022. It's like,
That's our theme for 2022,
yeah.
boutique marketing.
Mhm, mhm. We're done with
Oh, but
guerrilla marketing. We want it to just smell nice, and there
right.
to be soft music down.
Yes. Yeah. No, but I mean, there's no denying like the value or the intrigue behind, that a boutique strategy like that. Or if we can just step back and, maybe generalize it a little bit more, just the power of nostalgia, right? I mean, it's the reason
Mhm.
why when we have galas and stuff, we still dress up like it's the 20s, because there's a feeling associated with that, right? So there's definitely power there, and proof that it still works, and that it worked even, pre-pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think where we are in history, not to go completely off on this tangent, this is definitely a conversation we're having again. Where we are in history, what's so fun about it is that the people that we need to talk to, like we have such a breadth of history that even if people weren't there, it like we like marketers have been relying on nostalgia for so long now that, like you point out the gala, and like you could do a Great Gatsby gala and your customer probably was not alive in the 20s.
Right.
They have no idea.
Very good
They're not-
odds of that.
yeah, they're not roaring 20s people who were, at a speakeasy in the 20s, but like they're pulling nostalgia from this whole other place. Or, maybe even more interestingly, they're manufacturing it. And you just have to be a part of that manufacturing of that nostalgia and capitalize on it. Gross. That was the grossest sales thing I've ever said. I should be stopped.
I forgive you.
I appreciate that. Okay. Should we move on?
We should.
Our next question is, what is a big change that you'd advise a client to be ready for in 2021? And I'm incredibly glad that I highlighted this one, because I do think it's pertinent to a lot of the rest of our conversation. We had one of our HR friends wanted to talk about employee mental health. She says, employee mental health, the needs for frontline managers to recognize the signs and have the tools to address it. And I think as things wear on, it was already important, like in the end of 2020, going into the beginning of 2021, to be thinking about how we can keep our people, and our frontline people certainly, but anyone working, how we can keep them in a headspace that that's good for them, that's good for the business, that's good for the community. Like there's just a lot, and I think people's bandwidth, certainly as we came, I'm trying to think back to the end of 2020, and that feeling of, we had a summer where we're like, we can be outside now. Outside seems safe. And then things started, cases started going back up, and we were back in the house. And I think that was a really tough time for a lot of people, and people's bandwidth really shrank. So when our HR friend points this out, like very pertinent to that time. And now, like things have gone on. I don't think it's a surprise to, this is not a shocking revelation, much longer than we thought they would, And so if you were already burnt out at Christmas time in 2020, it's been a long road. And, for some people, the availability of vaccines, lifting some restrictions, as those things have cycled through, I think they have given a lot of us sort of a respite, right? From that feeling of being, constantly, I don't know, constant bad news, I guess is really what it was. But, the longer we are unsettled, particularly moving this back to the business and away from the personal, the longer we don't know how next week or next month or next year looks from a business perspective, or what, the longer we can't plan with what we thought was certainty 5 years ago, and we thought planning was normal. The more, I think, being aware of how that affects people's mental health, and what, coming back to the idea of changing and innovating, like what that means. Because again, knowing that knowing this is shared trauma, right? We see it on a grand scale. Everyone's going through this. Well, not everyone, but this big group of people is. But that doesn't mean that in quote unquote normal times, people aren't going through the same kind of stuff individually. And so we have this great opportunity now to recognize what effect does trauma have on a team, and what can we do to recognize that? What can we do to combat that? When are we willing as leaders, as organizations, to say, I can't fix what's happening, so I'm going to give this employee or this group of employees the freedom and the space to do what they need to do to take better care of themselves. That sounded unduly harsh, but what I'm saying is making it the best we can within our organization, a healthy culture where we're honoring, people where they're at. And then when we know that our culture isn't going to fix someone, quote unquote, giving them the time off, the pay, whatever they need to get the help they need.
Right.
That was a big sweeping statement from someone who has zero practical medical experience.
Yeah. Well, and it's something to recognize too is, and none of this is easy. What you just said is not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy solution. But just another variable in the whole mental health. I was going to say game. It's not a game, but that whole topic is trusting and trusting and empowering people to do what they need to do. Because there's only so much control that we as fellow coworkers or as an organization can do for people. We have a responsibility to provide support and help. And I think that there's a lot of places with the new awareness and kind of awakening around mental health, especially in our country. There's a lot of support, I think, that's there, but then there is a certain point where that support needs to be met with something else from other people, other groups that can provide support, and from people themselves to really have a feeling and a sense of empowerment that it is okay for me to talk about this. At the least, it's okay for me to try and do something about it. And that maybe has been one of the bigger hurdles, I think, for us to really make much forward movement on the state of mental health in the country. Is we've just for so long been this greater culture of punching in, working, not complaining, not taking time for yourself. The perception of being a quitter if you move on to a new job, or of being lazy if you call in sick, or whatever, right? Like all of those old things that I think we've definitely seen progress on, but there's probably a good distance to go yet to be in a really truly healthy place.
Yeah. Well, and another example is that I think about pretty often more as someone who leans introverted, doesn't lean introverted. I'm 100% an introvert, but this concept of getting out of your box, right? And constantly creating this culture of only valuing employees when they are, pushing themselves outside of their box, and how that probably runs contrary to honoring someone's struggle with mental health, because sometimes the box people are in, those are walls that are meant to protect them. And so you're essentially other people, it's like, like you said, it's hard because you do have to make a distinction. Some people just aren't trying a thing because they don't want to try a thing. Other people aren't trying a thing because they have created a barrier
Mhm.
that protects them from it.
Right.
And so, and it ties back to DEI because it ties, from that inclusion standpoint and thinking not just about the policies and the sort of general the mindset we have, but thinking about the language we have and, not and trying to move away from using things like, it's crazy that you did that, or, oh, well, I had to move that because of my OCD. Like some of these things, like I if I'm not uh if I am not diagnosed,
Yeah.
that's basically saying like uh something that someone else is born with or prone to or experienced through trauma is a thing that everyone should be able to laugh at, and it's all fine, right?
Right. Right.
So I think this is, and in the way it ties to DEI, it's such a big conversation. Um, and I'll predict in 10 years it's all better.
Right.
No.
I'm compelled to give our IT friends a little bit of love because there were some great predictions too, as far
Please.
as um, changes in predictions for 2021. And there was both a mention of building a cybersecurity framework and getting to it fast, making it a priority, especially if you're a credit union. And then also a mention of examiners and auditors wanting to know what you're doing to make sure your vendors are stable and secure, and everything else that might go into an exam or an audit. So, yep, yes, and yes.
All that.
So I think it was worth recognizing that those are a couple of predictions that are definitely true and are likely going to still have to be a priority in the near future. Well, and I mean, really always, but
Yeah.
just as that landscape continues to change, just things to be mindful of for sure.
Yeah, I do. I think the last year or two were we saw a lot of great examples of how the the bad guys, the fraudsters, are like 10 steps ahead of us,
Right.
and are able to say, oh, well, everybody's working from home, so now, what's our answer to that? And it's interesting. It's uh maybe a little disheartening to think that the bad guys who are out to cause problems with cybersecurity and out to steal data and things like that are so far ahead of the people who are really just trying to figure out, how do you get everybody to work from home and still come to meetings and be,
Right.
yeah, and make that all work. So,
Well,
yeah,
I think we need to move on to our fourth question and kind of go into rapid fire mode here. We're running out of time.
let's do
Uh,
it.
so the fourth and final question that we mentioned was, or that we asked was, what's a personal change that you're planning to make for 2021? Which I thought was a great way to wrap up um, this post, because a lot of the changes that we've been talking about are maybe bigger picture, organizational, industry wide, and a lot of times those changes have to start down at the individual level, right? Or a personal change. So a really nice way to kind of button up the conversation. But yeah, some interesting feedback on those for sure. And a lot of it really had this theme of learning, right? Like
Mm.
continual learning, continual improvement, personally, professionally. There was mentions of getting better at the software that people use, taking in content like podcasts and stuff like that. Shameless plug for our podcast, right? But also, I suppose it maybe isn't too shameless because since I'm plugging it to the people that are actually listening to it right now.
There you go.
But yeah, getting outside of comfort zones, which how crazy is it to think that somebody actually responded pushing comfort zones after a year where everybody was forced out of
Right.
anything comfortable, right? But maybe a silver lining of the whole thing is that we were maybe forced to doing some things that made us uncomfortable in 2020, and we made it. So
Yeah.
maybe we can push ourselves to keep pushing a bit uh, into 2021 and the future for sure. Did you notice anything interesting in that last question?
I think exactly what you're saying about all of the responses really being around learning and growth, and what kudos to our team, because I do think that that's a mindset that this group of people really take no matter what. But to see it in the end of 2020 going into 2021 and still having people be like, well, I have to grow more, and and maybe it is the case that it was this general recognition of I really thought I was learning and growing, I really thought I was adaptable, and then everything went crazy, and now I realized I'm not adaptable. I don't like change as much as I told everybody, and that's a thing I need to work on.
Right.
you know yeah. And uh I just really think, in my opinion, because I've been at the credit union 735 years, I can tell you that the way you keep growing is you keep learning. And the people who have dug in their heels and said, like, nope, I'm done, I can't learn anything else, I don't need to know that, whatever, they don't move forward, they don't succeed.
Right.
And a growth mindset, it's not a cool buzzword, it's vital. It's
Right.
that's the only way that you continue to be employed.
So let's look back on our 4 questions here in our conversation today. How do you think we did, Sue, as a group? How did we do on our predictions for 2021?
It's interesting, because when you first proposed this as a topic, I was like, oh, maybe we shouldn't.
No.
It was so, but I think we did really well. I definitely score us at least a 9 out of 10
Yeah,
on
I
that scale.
agree. I think my big takeaway from like reflecting on these questions and people's responses, and thinking about how we might be able to make a podcast episode out of this, I think like a learning that I have from the last hour or so is like, even at a time where we all knew and were prepared for it to be unpredictable, another roller coaster, using the words of one person from our response where they said, I bet it'll be a doozy next year. Like, we knew that 2021 was going to be a doozy, and here we are in October, almost through it.
Mhm.
um, there's still a lot that we predicted, like pretty much right on the money. Like there were some of these responses are exactly things that we've talked about, that we've done, that we've focused on this year. So I think, and really, to give us as humans credit, looking back even on 2020 when things were super chaotic, and certainly at times it felt like we were maybe on the hamster wheel, we still were in control of a lot, and we still were able to plan and execute things because we have information, we have data, we have expertise, and we have the skills to do things. So I think, even as crazy as we knew 2021 was going to be, we were able to predict a lot of it and get a lot done. And I think that looking ahead into 2022, you can't help but say, yeah, there's probably still a certain amount of unknown, but we can take the information that we have now, what we learned in 2021 and even before, and we can apply it to make 2022 a good year,
Right.
personally, professionally, whatever it might be. And of course, some of that maybe might be impacted by attitude, which is super important too. But even just using the data and the facts and the things that we know and our skills and expertise, we can move forward even in a crazy world.
Yeah. And just final thought on that for me, and really this is my opportunity to shout out the clients that we work with, uh,
Mm.
to a person. Every single one of our clients went into 2021 best foot forward. We did not hear from anyone like, well, I don't know what to do. And that can be in our job to support them, that could be really difficult for us to be able to give them what they're looking for, to be able to really collaborate with them. If we had people whose attitudes were, maybe we need to scale back, whatever. We had no one from our clients that were interested in hiding under a rock. Everybody was looking just as forward, and they kicked butt. Like they kept, every single one of them kept moving forward. And it like that, I think that made, for me personally, for our team, it made 2021 a really, and it's not over yet, but a great year, because when you surround yourself with people who have hope, you become a just more hopeful organization, and you get to continue to do things that you love to do with that hope in mind and forward looking. So there, that was as shameless as I can get. But I wouldn't have said it that way if you didn't know I already schmoozed them like that in person.
Yeah, right. Everything you just said, we'd say with them in the room. It's all good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Awesome. Wow. Well, it's weird because it's time to transition to our Something Awesome segment, even though I feel like, especially the last few minutes of our reflection was pretty awesome, but this whole episode's been pretty awesome. But let's do that. Let's get into our closing here and our Something Awesome segment, where we recommend content, books, experiences, cool things that we've just been through. And for me, I'll kick it off. I've shared before on the podcast that I'm, I don't know, amateur at best, but an amateur stargazer. I love looking up. I love seeing the sky. And I think today is actually the day of the real full moon, but last night it was almost as full as it can be, right? Like super close. Anyways, it was beautiful. It came over the horizon and had this awesome orange color. And I was able to get a couple pictures of it before it hid itself behind the clouds. So it was really cool. I think I've probably like intentionally went out and, set up with a tripod and everything and like tried to photograph, not shoot the moon. I understand the bullet won't make it to the moon, but photograph the moon.
Maybe an arrow.
Yeah. I just need an arrow. Yeah. No, but I've tried to photograph the moon like that probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, like really with purpose and planning and intention behind it. And last night was one of those nights, even though it was kind of cut short by the clouds. But I got out there a little bit too early, which was okay because it was nice to be prepared. But one thing that we'll share the link to is an app that I use called Skylight, which shows you where a lot of other things are besides the moon, including the planets, and you can, show it up at the sky and it'll show you where constellations are and stuff. So it's a really cool app if you like looking at the sky at night. But it was super helpful for me as someone trying to photograph the earliest point I possibly could when the moon would come over the horizon. So it was as big as possible and as orange as possible. And so it was just really cool for me to get set up and know that I had precisely like 17 minutes to go and do whatever else I wanted to do, and then be back at the camera in time for the moon to be where it was over the horizon. So the app is awesome. Staring at the moon is awesome, especially when it's full, and just looking up into the cosmos is always something that I geek out about. But so if that's a thing you haven't done before, I would encourage it. It's peaceful. It's just a really cool way to kind of separate yourself from the buzz of the world if you have the space to do it. And I'm fortunate to have a nice big backyard where I can get out and enjoy the nature.
Yeah, and you're further away from town too now.
Yeah, a
So
little
is it
further
better?
out of town.
Is it even better? Less
It is
light?
better, yeah, because where we used to be, there was kind of a ridge if you were looking to the east, and by the time the moon actually like rose over the trees and stuff, it was just high enough in the sky where sometimes it depending on where it was as far as its proximity to Earth. Sometimes looked a little bit bigger, but it was pretty typical. And now where I'm at, I can kind of peek out through the woods and see it when it just gets over the horizon or over the tree line, and it's much bigger. So yeah, some cool testing to do here and get some cool shots.
Awesome. Love it. Well, my something awesome, I might have already shared this at some point on the podcast. I don't think I've shared it since you and I have been co-hosts. But if I haven't shared it, I don't know why I wouldn't. My absolute favorite podcast, which I think, so full disclaimer, it is not safe for work. Do not turn it on and listen to it in your office, especially if you work in a cubicle farm. It is not that kind of podcast, but it is, it's called The Dollop, and it is a history podcast in which it's two comedians co-host it. One of them, his name is Dave Anthony, reads a story from history to his co-host. And first of all, they are hilariously funny and they riff on the story. And also you get to have the experience of listening to someone learn things about history that we aren't learning in school in real time. So at the second that you're like, what is happening? You have his co-host, Gareth Reynolds, is saying that probably,
Right.
wait, what's going on? So it is an absolute banger of a podcast, but again, not safe for work. Do not pretend that I told you this is something you could listen to with your kids, because it is not like that. The language is blue, but really well researched, really smart, very interesting stories that they do. They've done like some that are really sort of early American history. They all periods of history they do. And probably the thing that I get the most out of it is when they start a story that is actually leading up to current events. So you can kind of say, oh my gosh, that is how we got to where we are. Or they talk about something that parallels something happened currently, and you can go, I don't know why we didn't learn that lesson.
Sure. Yeah.
But it is excellent. Again, let me say for the fifth time, not safe for work. But really well done. And I have, okay, this is my humble brag, I have gotten to see them live. And
cool.
there is photographic evidence I got to meet them and hug them.
Wow.
I know, right?
Fun.
And I have an autograph and everything.
Nice.
Whatever. I don't
Super
want to
fan.
brag. I don't want to brag, but
Well, we'll share all that stuff with the audience, right?
yes. And I will add in parentheses, not safe for work, along with mine.
Perfect.
Awesome. So we will share those links below. Here is your reminder. You can find us on your favorite podcast app, or you can jump over to our blog, exclamationqso.com/blog. We will share the link to the blog we referred to in this post, in this podcast. Words, so hard. But you can see all kinds of different things, including, by the time this one comes out, we have another blog post I'm very excited about, and the name I can't say will have already been in the world. So once you see this, then go back to our last blog post, because I think you'll really like that one too if you like this. Fair?
Yeah, it rhymes with, what are you half massing?
Massing, I suppose.
Very close to that, actually.
Glassing?
Glassing?
Flossing?
Well,
no.
Yeah, be sure to check that one out. And until next time, thank you, friends, for tuning in. This is Sue and Ben, your certified professors of awesomology, reminding you that life's awesome if you make it awesome. We'll see you next time.